Welcome everybody to our third edition of the IJP Global Fellows Talk. As part of the series Reset Germany, what follows after the Merkel era, the Global Fellow Talks looks ahead. I'm Marco Vollmer. I'm member of the board of the International Journalists Programs, IJP, heading the exchange program with the Southern African countries. And together with my colleague Vasilios Theodosiou, I'm your host of this Global Web Talk series.
Good afternoon, I'm Vasilios Theodosiou. I'm the head of IJP's UK and Northern European program. And our topic today actually was, until 48 hours ago, rebuilding the economy between COVID, digitalization and climate neutrality. Now it's more a little bit like rebuilding the economy between Russia and Ukraine. So let me add this issue to the agenda that we have today. Obviously, as we are talking to journalists, the agenda has to be current. So, but to give it a little bit of broader thing and go back to the issue we originally intended, the global pandemic has had a terrible impact on the German economy. Now we add to this the crisis with Ukraine and Russia. What is going to happen now to the German economy? We had severe delivery chain bottlenecks already in the last couple of months and maybe a year. You see this if you want to buy a car, you see this if you want to build a house. Everything is really problematic in technical terms and really expensive as inflation is already very high. The energy cost, and you will see this every day at the gas pump, is on a highest level anybody has ever thought of. It could be. So the question is now, how we do get back from where we are now to where we have been before, or do we have to go to somewhere else instead of that? And we are really excited today on this really special day and this special week to discuss these issues and all other questions regarding the German economy with our two distinguished guests here.
As we have Dr. Franziska Brantner. She is State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Prior to that, she worked as Parliamentary Managing Director and Spokesperson for European Policy for the Parliamentary Group of Alliance 90, the Greens, and which is in this current issue with Ukraine and Russia also interesting. I think from 2009 until 2013, she has been a member of the European Parliament, spokesperson on foreign policy for Parliamentary Group of the Greens, the EFA, the European Party fraction here. She holds diploma from Sciences Po in Paris and Master of International Affairs from the Columbia University in New York. Welcome, State Secretary Dr. Brantner, to our IJP Global Fellows Talk.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
And let me ask an introductory question. We all have seen the aggressive move of Vladimir Putin in the Ukraine. What does that mean from your point of view, from the point of view of the federal government for the German and European economy?
We stand together with Ukraine and do condemn the attacks and actions by Vladimir Putin. And when we see it, it is for us an even stronger incentive to unite as Europeans, as those who stand up for democracy and international law, and as well as speeding up our transition towards renewable energies to become less dependent on imports of fossil imports. And I think that this is an accelerator for our action in our house, but also in the German government. We see that yesterday was a shift. It will be an important, line when we will look back in history. And I think that we will have to reflect this all in economics, in defense policy, defense spending, etc. And I think that what I'm happy about is that we have been quite united as Europeans together with our transatlantic partners, and that if the goal of Putin was to divide the West, he has not achieved.
Vasilios, over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Brantner. Good to see you again. I'm now happy to introduce to you Dr. Joachim Lang, who is a member of the BDE, the Federation of German Industry Executive Board, since December 2016 and will be until end of May this year. Before that, he worked for the energy giant E.ON in Germany and headed their Berlin office until 2016 and served in German politics. Dr. Lang, yesterday evening, we saw an interview with one of the members of the Ostausschuss der Deutschen Wirtschaft, the Eastern Board of the German economy, who said the sanctions on Russia will have a very bad and severe impact on the German economy. Do you share this opinion?
First of all, we thank you very much for having me here. First of all, we of course condemn yesterday's decisions by the Russian government and the recognition of the Eastern Ukrainian separatist areas and the development of troops. There are a clear violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and the Minsk agreement. And we're very concerned about, and for the people in the region, not the least for the well-being of more than 350,000 employees of our companies in Russia and Ukraine. There will be, as usual, effects, but this is not the time to talk about costs and negative effects. This is the time of politics and all efforts that are possible to resolve this problem.
Thank you for that first insight. Before starting now and getting into our discussion, we would like to ask our alums to participate and enrich our discussion. Raise your hand or write your question in the chat so that you can participate and can attend our discussion. Also, for those who are the first time here in our web talk, we have a graphic recording. So our discussion will be, we will always give it a try, will be concentrated and focused by a graphical recorder so that you can on one side that you can see in one view what we have talked about, and that will be published tomorrow on our website at IJP. I would ask, and I would like to structure our discussion, as we said, for the first part, that we really trying to figure out like what kind of reactions and what kind of impact does the aggressive move of Vladimir Putin has on German and on maybe European economies. And on the other hand, in the second part, we would like to talk more about the transformation which is going on here in Germany, and what Franziska also talked about, and Dr. Lang also, I think, has a position, and the industry in Germany, also the Federation of Industries. So, but starting with Russia, we would like to have, now it's my mother who is calling in. This always happens when I'm here in a talk, no problem at all. We're going open and transparently with that. We have my first question: when we watch all the news yesterday and before yesterday, the question also which was pointed out is, are sanctions the right instrument, the right tool, as a reaction from the Western part, from the European side? Maybe first to Franziska Brantner, what is your opinion on that?
You know, my impression is when we look back, I think that we have to see that this is a process that has been ongoing. When you look 2008, Georgia, then, you know, when you look at the entire process, I think that we are not at the end or of an escalation. Maybe we might have some de-escalation, but it might just be for a little time, and then we will get the next step, and we will get the next round of escalations. And I think that at the same time, we should also still try to engage with Russia when it comes to transforming its energy production to make it sustainable. So this will be the difficult path to understand that. I think the phase we are in, that this is the new normal, and to a certain extent I think that it's also not, you know, of course Ukraine is a more open country with elections, etc. But I think probably if it wasn't, Putin would still go and try to enlarge. He said it quite bluntly in his own speech, to change borders again. And so I think that we have to become more alert and prepare our economies better for that. And at the same time, we have the challenge from China, which we should not neglect, where we have similar difficulties when it comes to dependencies on raw materials, but also on processing of raw materials, and where we see unfair attacks against our internal EU market. And at the same time, we want to stay in trade relations and also work closely on climate protection. And we're trying in our ministry to find a good balance. And I think part of it is really diversification for imports and exports, and to make sure that we help our companies to do so. It's a process, Mr. Vollmer. I don't think it will happen overnight, but it will probably take some time, but it's important to start it.
Allow me, before we giving the floor to Dr. Lang, allow me one additional question. Do you personally think that Vladimir Putin is impressed by that reaction?
You said earlier that the impact of the current sanctions on the Germany economy would be really, really high. When we look at the current sanctions package, I think it's quite limited. So we also have to be careful that we do not overestimate or overportray what we are doing. I think that Putin is probably counting this in. It's probably the imperial tax that he has calculated for the price. But I still think it's important to do so, to be clear and to send signals. And as Mr. Lang said, if we just calculate in terms of how much do we win economically or lose economically, it would be the wrong calculus these days, because you cannot measure what peace costs or what the internal market of the EU costs or what our relations with Ukraine costs. So I think, does it impress him? I think he probably did not expect so much EU unity, but one must say that he has already gained a lot. He has troops now in Belarus. It's tough for the Ukrainian economy, access to credit, etc. He has made a lot of money with the high gas prices over the last couple of months. So, every cent that we pay more goes also into his cash flow. So I think we also have to look at what already happened, and not just what happened yesterday. And I think then, the perspective is that the unity was important, and that the worst thing we could do now is to give up that unity and start fizzling over, but the sanction is too tough on the German economy, or it's too tough on the French or on the Americans, but really to keep that unity, because otherwise I think we will pay a quite high price in the midterm for it.
Dr. Lang, your point on that?
Well, sanctions are an instrument of politics, and I think we have learned a lot about using them. So this is the first step, what we see, and they are much more designed on people now, since we're talking about political decision makers, and to have something like the EU Magnitsky Act is important, so that mistakes from the past, when people in a country suffered a lot, are now much more addressed, since these sanctions are designed. And we will all learn if the design is already good or if we can improve. So this is just the first step. So the impact is probably not as big as we wish it to be, but there are more steps to come compared to what's going to happen. So to your question, is he going to be impressed? I don't think so, but it's also not important for us if he's impressed or not, because he has already decided to pay a price. And as Franziska Brantner said, The decision was made long before. Just imagine what all these maneuver cost. So if you think about the cost of all the weeks that are behind us, now it's pretty clear that he wants something for it, but it's not an economic idea behind it. It's something that will cost him a lot, but he's willing to pay the price. And we should be clever to reduce the cost for us, but we have to accept that this is something that we didn't do voluntarily. Nobody wants to harm himself, but we have to take this into account. And the most important thing doesn't cost anything, and this is the unity of the European Union and the Western world.
Maybe I add the next question to the same field. I think the rest of the world was really relieved that the government took Nord Stream 2 off the table yesterday. Mr. Habeck, your minister, Dr. Brantner, yesterday explained that very carefully that it is not a sanction to take off Nord Stream 2, but a legal decision, because there is a legal procedure in allowing Nord Stream 2 to get to action. Maybe you can explain what exactly this procedure is, because for our foreign guests, this is pretty, well, not really understandable. What is the difference?
Pretty German. It's pretty German, I would say.
In a way, it's pretty German. The second thing is, and Mr. Habeck was not really clear on this, is when do you think, or under which conditions can you put Nord Stream 2 on the table again? Has Putin to leave first, or is this something you say, okay, if he draws back from Luhansk and Donetsk, we might discuss it again, or is this over now forever?
You know, what is the procedure? It's not a sanction, as you said. We are in the midst of the certification process of the net company, for which under European law, you need the okay from the Bundesnetzagentur, the net agency, that the unbundling between, you know, who owns the pipeline, who is running it, and to whom belongs the gas, etc., so that you have an unbundling. This is what the Bundesnetzagentur has to deliver. And then you have a second component, which is an assessment by the government, by the Ministry of Economy, on the question, does this pipeline, or, you know, in the hands of Netzbetreiber, endanger the security of energy supply, of energy security in Germany and Europe. And if there is a no, it does not endanger it, then, you know, this allows to go ahead. And once you have these two parts, it goes to the European Commission, that also has to check and comment on the unbundling question, and can comment on the assessment of the energy security assessment. And the process currently is actually on hold because remember, in the beginning, it was a Swiss company that asked for the certification, and the BNetzA said it can't be a Swiss company. So it's now a German company, Gas for Europe, but they have not yet handed in all the necessary documentation. So the process is on hold anyhow right now. But in this procedure, we have decided to withdraw the assessment of the old government, of the previous government, which dates from last year, October, because we believe that this winter of 2021-2022 requires us to update the analysis of the security of energy.
So let me well forward the question to Dr. Lang. Do you want to have Nord Stream 2 back, if it's possible, from a perspective of German industry at all?
First of all, I think that the reaction of the German government was pretty clever. Not to wait until sanctions or to make it a sanction, but to make it a government decision in an ongoing process. That is on hold now. So that is quite understandable and a good decision. And of course, we think that within the thought of energy that needs to come to Germany and imports, this has always been one way. And we are, when we look back, we had always very good ties with Russia in this area. So if we need the gas, and if the companies who run it want it, and there are customers, this is a way to do business, but it's now not the time to talk about business and people who need gas. It's time to give a signal and to show that we are also able to use geoeconomics to show that we are not satisfied with the situation that was created by Russia.
But allow us a kind of strategic view on that pipeline. And I think it is more or less been clarified now that it is not only a economic relationship here and an economic good, so to say, as a pipeline usually is. It is more. It is geopolitics, and it is much more when it comes to peace questions, etc. So. Question, because of, Dr. Brantner, you talked about in your introductory remarks about the diversification of imports and exports. Isn't it? Is it also more than a task and a duty for a government to also diversificate the risk of getting goods like energy, which is an extreme important and an extreme valuable good? So what is the opinion on the new government here?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And you know, I come from the Green Party, so energy has always been a political issue for us. So the suggestion that energy is not political has always been in a way been absurd for me, because it's such a political issue, internal and externally. And I think, you know, when you look at the European law, which is the basis for our government's action, if it was purely a technical exercise, the government wouldn't have to write such an assessment. And with that, in the legal basis, it is clear that you have a political assessment based on facts, of course. You know, we're a state of the rule of law. So we're not in a dictatorship where we can say stop or go, and I'm very happy about this. So we have to found our decisions on facts on the ground. But you know, we have seen that facts on the ground have changed, unfortunately. So what is the duty of a government? We have seen over the winter how difficult it is to have no legal basis for acting on the gas market, really. To see that our gas stockages, gas reserves were not full at the beginning of the winter, and that we have no legal way to oblige companies to fill or have full gas reserves, unless you know, you have most other European countries that have some regulation. Italy does, almost all other countries have. Germany is one of the very rare countries where you don't have any sort of regulation. We have an oil reserve, but we don't have a gas reserve. You know, it's totally, we have it since the 70s for oil, but we don't have it for gas. So we will introduce that. We will look at the best models from our European neighbors. We have some options on the table, and we'll put this forward, because I think, you know, if next winter the gas reserves would be empty again, every citizen would ask us, why haven't you done anything to prevent that? And I think the only way, like, I'm in favor of using a market-based way, where we do not become a constant gas buyer, because I don't think that this would be a good role for us. So to make it, you know, a way that doesn't distort competitiveness and is equal for all actors on the market. I hope we will, you know, find a good solution on this. So this is very important. First thing. And then the second one is that we need to reduce the amount of gas that we need in Germany. When it comes to housing, heating, etc. We have technologies that do lower it, and we have to spread them faster in Germany, and reduce also and become more efficient. Build faster. We already were planning to speed up processes for renewables, but I think now it becomes ever more urgent to speed up the process. And lastly, to diversify imports. That's why we have been talking about the LNG terminal. That's why we're speeding up the process on hydrogen, the infrastructure for it. So, we're not betting on one. We also don't want to replace one dependency with another one. We don't want to replace one dependency with, let's say, one on Saudi Arabia for green hydrogen or whatever. To really diversify and get larger, larger variety of origins. So it's a set of measures, and at the same time we try and we will help socially to counterbalance the high prices that citizens do face.
Okay, so maybe another word to the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand electronically. You will find a reaction in the lower bar of the Zoom window. So if you have a question, please raise your hand or write it into the chat. As I don't see any questions now, we maybe move on to the next field of climate transformation. We have seen during the pandemic that the pandemic was actually a accelerator for digitalization. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. 3 years ago, Zoom was inexisting and a tiny company in the outskirts of San Francisco, I assume. Can the Russian crisis or the Ukraine crisis, which is also basically an energy crisis, as we have seen over the last couple of months, be an accelerator for the climate transformation? Because now we see the real geostrategic costs of this dependency you were just talking about, Ms. Brantner. So maybe the first question to Dr. Lang, what do you think? Can that be a turning point in energy policy and in climate policy?
I think so, absolutely. And as Franziska Brantner described, Germany will always be, in a way, dependent on energy imports in some way. We will never be able to substitute the energy that is now being imported by just renewables from Germany. So we have to think about where does the renewable energy come from. And we've seen the first contracts being signed for volumes of hydrogen being imported from Australia, coming to Germany. And we see that many companies are preparing for signing contracts. So what we really need is the larger companies can do this on their own. But as you all know, we have a very strong, and that's the backbone of German economy, a strong German Mittelstand, and they need infrastructure. So we are absolutely adept and ready to discuss with the new government how we can implement this new infrastructure in Germany, and how we can reduce cost for this, so that everyone who needs hydrogen to replace oil or gas has the possibility to get it. And even if you are in remote areas and not in the capitals of the federal states in Germany. So this is what we need to talk about. How can we get the infrastructure? Where do we get the renewables from? How can we diversify? How much does it cost? And at the end, when we talk about business, it's always, where's the business case? And as we've seen, that the new government in Germany is willing to work together with industry. This is the good news, because we all realize that neither side can do it alone. For example, if you have CEOs who are willing to invest billions, at the end, they need a grid system that for transport of the renewable energy, for example, from offshore wind farms to their company. And we will need infrastructure to get the hydrogen, for example, from Rotterdam or Antwerp to Germany. And this is nothing that companies can do on their own. We need a close cooperation in this between government and companies. And we as BDI, we have done a study on how much does it cost to achieve the 2030 targets. We designed a plan in 4 sectors: industry, energy, transport, and housing. What are the next steps to reach the 2030 targets? And the investment number is 860 billion. So this is not 860 billion by the private sector. It's not 860 billion by the state. It's maybe 80% to 20%. But we need to talk about who does what and when and which order. And that's quite something to create this plan. But we need to do this together to get the transformation done. And this is a huge task, but we proved that it's possible, but we have to do much more than we did in the past. And one thing is for sure, and this can only be done by the state and the government, we have to reduce the time that we need for permitting processes in Germany. This is something very national, and we can also change it on a national level. We have 3 different levels of state. We have the federal level, we have the states level, and we have the municipalities. And each level has to do something to accelerate that process. But even if you have the money and the willingness to build a power line or something like that, it can take 10 years to get it. And this is much too long. And we have many of these processes. And it's a very good signal of the new government to show that they want to introduce a law by summer on how to accelerate this process, because without this process, even if we have technology and money, we will not be successful. So we need this in advance, and then we can loosen the brake and we can go on.
Before coming to our fellow, there's a question in the chat, just Franziska Brantner, the question to yours, what would be the major innovation in speeding up these kind of planning procedures or processes?
Oh, there is not the one golden bullet that you can have. And as Mr. Lang just said, we are a federal state with the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And some of this we can change at the federal level, but then you have the state and the local. So it is not so easy, to be frank, but and we're not just looking at energy infrastructure, we're also looking at transport infrastructure, for example, because there we will have the same process. If you want to build high-speed trains, we can't allow ourselves that it takes like 20 to 30 years to build them, because by then we would have failed. So it is a speeding up process in general, which I think is also the right approach, not just energy, but more broadly speeding up procedures in Germany. And we are right now really scanning all different sorts. For example, also when it comes to energy windmills, we have the radar question of military settings, where we want, and then we have Denkmalschutz. How do you say it in English?
Heritage protection.
Heritage protection rules. So we have quite a number of hurdles, also in the when it comes to the fauna and flora, etc. But it's also between the layers, like and when can you go to court? What are the delays? How many people do we have at court treating the files? So it is quite a number of dossiers that we're looking at to speed the process. And any good ideas are always welcome. So we're getting a lot of proposals these days, and I think it's good. Whoever has a good idea on what we can do to speed up the process, they're welcome. Part of it is also digitalization, which is also much slower still in Germany than in other member states. So yeah, we have quite some backload, I would say, to work on.
We have a question from the audience now, from Nikita Bayukov from Bulgaria. And his question is, do you think there is a chance of a political approach from the new elected German government to organize a frequent cargo route from Asia to Europe using the existing electrified Russian railway system, and to establish a European high-speed train manufacturing corporation? I assume, Nikita, you assume that Mr. Putin will let us through with cargo shipping there. Ms. Brantner, any plans about that?
You know, I'm not in the Ministry of Transport. I know that we want to build up a European network of speedy trains, also night trains, etc. But I don't know on this Russian route. I don't want to say something wrong.
Okay, Mr. Lang, I know there are already cargo trains from China to Germany, ending in Duisburg, for example, as a major hub, and
Right.
they're added quite frequently to that. Is that a perspective to, well, to save oil? That would be Nikita's second question. Or is it just a practical thing to do without having to send all the goods by ship from China? Is that something really realistic to have in the upcoming years?
We are talking about huge volumes, and these volumes will never be able to be transported by train. So any increase in train transport is welcome, and also on cargo routes from China to Duisburg, for example. But we cannot substitute the ability of ships, and cargo ships can carry so much more than can be carried by trains. So we will be reliable on that, but we can improve the ships. And this is what we need to do. So when we talk about hydrogen, we can also talk about using hydrogen for the ships, and we can use LNG. So there are many ways of improving the transport by ship, and this will be more this will address the volume of goods that we transport between Asia and Europe. The amount is impressive, and it cannot be transported by trains.
Let me add one question to both of you.
And it's also cheaper, and environmentally it has a very good footprint.
Okay. Let me add just one question to both of you. We're talking about Russia and we're talking about China, and both are, from what we've learned now, to some degree stable, but not forever, probably. Are there any plans to move back manufacturing from China to Germany at all? Or do we just have to accept the fact that these goods have to be produced forever on Chinese or Russian soil, or in any other not really stable country? Ms. Brantner, bring back manufacturing. Is that a plan?
No.
No. Okay.
I'm no fan of saying we're going to produce everything back at home in Germany, and we do not have a division of labor. And, you know, I don't think it would be the right way. I don't think that we would want to produce all the textiles we have produced in the 50s and 60s in Germany. And, you know, I just think it's you know, right that we do invest in technologies and in our people and knowledge, and, you know, so I'm no fan of decoupling or doing everything back home.
So we do not accept that we're depending on Russian oil, but we accept that we are depending on Chinese factories. Is that correct?
No, that's not at all what I said.
Okay.
It's just, you asked me the question if we want to get everything back home, and I said no.
Okay.
Does this mean that we want to be dependent on China? No, I think we have to diversify also in our productions. And, you know, there's not just China. You have other locations where you can produce, and where we have to also invest in new markets, skills, and make that, you know, more accessible via trade agreements, via support for exports, foreign direct investments, etc. And I think this is maybe where we are a bit different than the previous government, that we need to make sure that we still have a technological basis on which we can build the next generations. And that's what we've seen on microchips, that we should not give it up, and sort of that we need to have a capacity in Europe. I don't say Germany, because I don't think it always has to be Germany. That we have capacity in Europe on key technologies, so that we still have them, but not in terms of we need to produce all, but if we can have the next development steps also and innovation in Europe. So it's, you know, it's a mixed bag of my answer, and I think we have to be very strategic about it in, you know, in dialogue with our companies and our industry, and I think that it's always a difficult balance to find between you know, staying in this interdependent world, which I want, and still becoming less vulnerable. And I think that must be the objective, to increase our resilience and our innovation potential, keep it at home, and at the same time to also be a reliable partner in this world.
So, same question to Dr. Lang. Isn't that a growth plan for the German business to bring back things here?
Not at all. So I'm completely with our state secretary, because we have seen a slowdown in globalization, but globalization is still the answer to modern business. And what we see is, and this is also learning from COVID pandemic, that production is moving to the customers. And this is true for the United States, for example. There's more production moving from Germany to the US, but it's also moving more production to Asia. And Asia is more than China. But more and more companies believe in producing for the market in the region. And so the products that are being sold in China will not be produced in Germany to the amount it had been in the past, but China is going to be served from the Asian region. So there will be more production in the Asian region by German companies. And what does this mean for Germany? So speaking as the general director of the largest European business association, this is maybe not good news for Germany, because there will be more competition with other areas in the world, and high energy costs might be a reason to move production in neighboring European countries, but also to give the incentive to move production to other countries where energy is cheaper if you are doing business in energy intensive sectors. So there will be more competition, and there will be more production in areas where German companies sell their products.
Dr. Lang, maybe one more question, and coming back to German soil, so to say, about the costs of transformation, which is intended by the new government. I think Dr. Lang pointed out about 860 billion for this transformation process. Dr. Brantner, how do you, and maybe this is also a question to explain it in a way to our foreign audience, how do you want to refinance that?
You know, as Mr. Lang said, we can only stimulate processes. I'm like, you know, if we would pretend that we're going to finance it all, I think it would be wrong, and a wrong understanding of markets. So the question is, how can we set the right framework, and how can we minimize risks? So the question is, how do companies that know that their investments are very high today, but they will pay off in the future, and are technologies for the future, how will they still do these investments? And how can we minimize risk? And I think part of the answer is to have a stable outlook in terms of companies knowing that we will stay course, and the transformation in terms of carbon neutrality will not be abandoned by the next government, or we will not abandon on the CO2 price by the next government. So we need clarity for the next couple of decades, because these are the investment cycles that our companies do have. And I hope that we have created this clarity in the European Union, also in Germany, and that the road is clear. And then the second part is, how do you help to invest and stimulate these investments? And that's what we are planning to do in the form of carbon contracts for differences, so that we do pay and support now the investments that hopefully will pay off in the future. Otherwise, companies shouldn't undertake them. And that if they do pay off in the future, companies will partially pay back that to the state. So it's this idea of the contracts for differences in price. And thirdly, of course, also we will work on regulation to make sure that the newest and best technologies become standards, be it in housing, be it in the automotive sector, in every single sector where we need to ensure that the market is really with the right regulatory framework, for example, recycling, etc. So these are also many companies in Germany, I know, that are very innovative, for example, on recycling. And they're not yet used to their max capacity because it still has an additional cost and it's not mandatory. So there's still many companies that don't do it. But we know that this is a growing market and we need to recycle the materials. So, this is the question of a good regulatory framework. So it's, I think it's several layers. And in the end, we need the curiosity, the creativity, strength, and insightfulness of our companies. And on this, I'm quite optimistic.
One additional question on that, because for those who know German politics a bit better, they might have seen like that the government, the so-called traffic coalition, is consisting from the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals. And the Liberals and Greens, do you think when it comes to stimulating economy that you find compromises, because the general views, the main views, are not that close to each other from our point of view, from my personal point of view?
We are two different parties and there is a reason for it, but we have agreed on a joint coalition treaty, and that's the basis we're acting on. And I do also know that my liberal colleagues do see the necessity to transform our economies for carbon neutrality and digitalization, and that we would like to really use the potential of both transformations to keep the best that we have in Germany and make it sustainable. And we have sometimes different ways on how we would do it, but luckily we have managed to agree on a joint path.
Thank you very much. I think we have come a little bit early to the end of the session. That was our third Global Fellows Talk, rebuilding the economy, and basically we talked about Russia, and we all keep our fingers crossed that next time when we meet, and probably we will re-invite you again for a meeting, we probably discuss a little bit more about what else the German economy has to look forward to apart from Russia, Ukraine, and any other crisis you name.
Thank you very much for your attendance. On our website, you will find the graphic recording by tomorrow from our colleague Wiebke Koch. Many thanks to our speakers, our distinguished guest, State Secretary Franziska Brantner, and Director General of the Federation of the Association of Industries, Dr. Klaus Lang. Our next talk will be already by tomorrow. Bundestag, the next generation. We will speak with new elected members of the German Bundestag, and I assume it will also go about the Russian case, so to say. Yeah, let's see what new members of Parliament think about that. Thank you here, everyone of our alumni circle, for your attendance. Goodbye, take care, and at least stay healthy.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.